So, are you ready for another session?
Sure, I am. Please proceed.
So, let me ask this question. Tell me, how can a man be spiritual at the same time not being a religious man? Is it possible? If yes, how? If not, why not?
See, the answer is simple. Uh, Spirituality concerns oneself with certain practices that are very essential and are highly individualistic in nature. So, you do not have to be dogmatic in the sense that you have to follow everything ritualistically. It's a sense of progression towards a goal that you set for yourself, and one can certainly be spiritual and not be dogmatic or religious in the strictest sense of the word, that you ultimately end up being limited by the religion's philosophy.
Okay. So, what are you? Are you a religious man or are you a spiritual man?
uh, my spirituality stems out from the philosophy that I have studied, and the Hinduism, yeah, the Sanatan that I know is precisely about this idea of spiritualism, where one seeks outside in order to turn inward, or turns inward in order to transcend everything. I am a spiritual, but with a strong sense of the Sanatan order. So, my idea of religion includes both of the aspects. That personally, I emphasize on the idea of being very spiritual, and at the same time, I also respect the philosophies of Hinduism.
So, how do you see the theory of Savarkar? I mean, he was somebody who was trying to define the difference between a state and nation, but he did not include.
Isn't isn't the same has been done already by the Western civilization, where for them, in fact, this whole idea of culture being the more important and decisive aspect of how a nation should be, rather than the strictest factors of population, sovereignty, uh, a well-defined geography, boundary. These have been the ideals that have been set by the Western population. For the Indian point of view, let me reiterate this very clearly, that India was never about uh, putting out the idea of nation into such simplistic terms and points. Rather, it it was about the cultural unity and the decentralization of it. So, if you read history, you'll find that India was culturally united through a lot of, let's say, networks of transmigrations of uh, people who used to go across the country for doing religious yatras. They were related through many aspects, and at the same time they were free to pursue their interest as well. So they were very democratic in the sense that they understood their local identity, they understood their locale, their milieu, but they also understood a larger unifying force at play that was there, not in terms of geographical boundaries, not in terms of a linguistic identity, not in terms of any modern factor per se, but rather a very subtle one and a very sublime one.
So, why does Savarkar differ from Govalkar's theory of nationalism? Why does Govalkar
See,
trying to
Golwalkar was a man.
support casteism as well as the Varna system, but on the other hand, Savarkar was somebody who was trying to do away with
Savarkar was
such concepts.
Savarkar. Savarkar's theory was more in line and in sync with the Western idea, where nation for him was an exclusive entity based on the feeling of patriotism, on the idea of defining what belongs to you and what is not you. That the positive aspect of it or the normative aspect of it was very clear. But for Golwalkar, it was more of a lesson turned inwards. That is, for Golwalkar, the matter was internal, the matter was cultural, the the issue was, uh, let's say, religious, the the nature of it being syncretic, inclusive. But for Savarkar, it was more on the lines of the Western notion. Though I may be wrong because I have not read Savarkar, but I'm going to read Vikram Sampat's book.
So, do you think that Savarkar was somehow?
Savarkar's idea was more political because Savarkar, by his own admission, was never a revolutionary of uh, action. The man was never directly involved in any kind of protest or in any kind of resistance against the establishment, but yes, he was a mentally very charged man. He was a highly organized man in terms of his vision. He knew what he wanted, he could execute it in terms of putting it on the paper, while the other side of it was his idea of nationalism found, let's say, home with the people that were looking for an idea or an ideology on the basis of which they could establish their own identity.
So, tell me, if nationalism is about feeling of oneness
Hmm.
and bringing people together,
Hmm.
then how could one religion be?
No,
How
no.
could one religion be discussed with the nationalism? Because if
No, no,
somebody talks of
I
Hindu nationalism,
I truly agree with you.
then
This
what
is
about Christians? Then what about Buddhists?
this is where we have to be a little more understanding of each other's ways of life and each other's perception of how they wish to see India. See, religion is not about oneness. It's about different ways of achieving that oneness, that unity in unison, the unity of action, the unity of, let's say, progressive idea, the unity of execution in terms of the government being able to do best for their country, their people. Now, now if let me stretch this argument of oneness. How do we define this idea of oneness? Is that idea of oneness exclusively mathematical, or let's say, is it exclusively designed or let's say conceived in such a way that it does not take into account the diversified nature of existence in this part of the country? No. Our idea of oneness is an overall umbrella kind of a structure where we tend to tolerate what we don't understand. Though for me, tolerate is a negative word. I think we accommodate more in terms of learning what we don't know or what we don't practice by accepting the idea of our worldview not being the only worldview that could lead us to, let's say, a higher truth.
But when I was reading the textbooks,
But not
I
all religions teach that. A particular region or a particular religion may have their own local issues, but when it comes to this place, you'll be surprised to know that this place has offered answers to, in fact, everything that has come into its folly.
so I was
How do I say that? I say that because, let's say, we analyze, let's say we take the history of the Abrahamic religions. They came here, they adjusted, and they accommodated, we in fact accommodated them in a very welcoming way. They had to take care of our certain notions that we had in this kind of interaction. We found that We could find a common pathway through which we can accept each other, but that's certainly not the case with the Europe.
So, how will you try to defend when Savarkar says that Muslims could be part of a state but they could not be part of a nation because they are not born here, because they have come from outside, because Savarkar considered them someone who were outsiders. So why is he considering them as a part of a state but not as a part of nation?
I'll tell you.
Why is he defining the religion in terms of territory? Because nationality is something, or nationalism is something which cannot be talked without the basis of territorial
No,
integrity.
no. A nation or a state needs a
So
territory.
don't you think that that opposes the
See,
whole
no,
notion
I'll
of
tell you why.
nationalism?
I think I do not agree with Savarkar's idea, or it might be that I do not agree with the uh, statement that you just told me about Savarkar. I might not fully understand the interpretation of it as well, but I think if that is the case, I don't think this holds water, because uh, to say that a population of such gargantuan proportion living currently in India came to this place via a path or migrated into this country is is not true. The population living here might have been converted, and the people who came through the through the gates of Afghanistan, Punjab, were able to convert them, and there might have been various reasons that can be looked into separately.
So do you think that Sufism also played a major role
Huh.
in conversion of
Huh.
Hindus into Muslims, because low caste Hindus were not given that kind of a status which they were searching for? Or maybe
Obviously.
because of our
See,
lacunas?
every in every time there there was a whole system which used to subaltern somebody who was already on the margins of the system, and every time something new took place, somebody had to lose power, somebody became more influential. So this is the continuous process of somebody reaching up the echelons of the society and somebody falling off the pedestal. And I do not contest that idea. Now, coming back to that Savarkar's idea, I am not in agreement with Savarkar. I cannot say that Muslims uh, can be a part of the state but not part of the nation. I think they can be very well part of this nation, because the whole idea of a Muslim existence is based on certain principles that have to be in sync with the idea of the nation. Now, for us, we have we have an existence or a way of life that believes in decentralization, that believes in diversity of opinion. So we, on the other hand, are more prone to chaos than them. But the only catch is, does the book, which captures every Muslim mind and soul, allow that interpretive space where a Muslim can attest to the idea of a nation? Because all that a Muslim attests to is the idea of subservience to the orders of Allah. And for him, the idea that a nation is important is not the primary concern.
So let me
It's always the tenets of law, which they call Sharia, more important
so let
than,
me
even at the in fact even at the cost of uh, the nation's detriment.
so you might be aware of the, the controversy which had emerged a few years ago,
Hmm.
that a lot of Muslims were not ready to speak in favor of Bharat Mata, because they could not worship anyone except Allah. So
Yes.
this is something which is very clear in the scriptures also.
नहीं नहीं,
So
I
don't
think I
don't you
think
think that
I think
when
it's
when
I
when
think it's
Savarkar
too
says,
much. I think it's too much to ask them knowing fully, and it's foolish to ask them knowing fully when you know, and when you are aware of the fact that they do not entertain, yeah, their worldview does not attest to the idea of Bhut Parasti or Bhut Puja, or they do not, they don't agree with the idea of idol worship.
so don't you think that they give
So
more
a
importance
Sagun,
to religious law?
they don't understand the idea of Indian philosophy. We also attest to the idea of oneness.
Then what about the
हम लोग भी ये
constitution?
कहते हैं कि एकोहम ब्रह्मास्मि, but the idea is we have six different philosophies talking about various opinions and various aspects of it, though all end up at the same juncture, but we have different ways to explore that idea, but they have been limited by that.
But in the concept of nationalism,
So
nation comes first.
see, if Allah is a symbol of unity and oneness for them, which they attest to, the only difference is that they do not attest to the ideas of different paths being taken to reach the same point. For them, it's simple because it's pointed out in terms of, rather I would say it's laid out.
So don't you think that what Savarkar said was right and justified?
I think for
There was
them,
nothing wrong what he said,
no, no, there is nothing wrong, but the idea of,
because they
see,
cannot worship the motherland. They could not be a part of a
no,
nation.
there
But
is
a state is something which is more synthetic, which
Arey
is
Baba, you cannot, you're doing a mistake by equating state with motherland. That idea of state as a mother does not exist except you making it, because you attest to that idea of representation, emotional representation, or the patriotic representation, or the, let's say, or the Sagun representation of something as plain as state. Because when you say that I am the member of a state or I am the citizen of a state, it does not uh, acquire any value except the fact that you have a legal right and a certain entitlement in a piece of land because you were born into it. But when you call some piece of territory your motherland, you attest to it in a very different way. The idea of culture comes in, the idea of the notion, I would say, the notion of culture comes in, the notion of unity comes in. So a lot of human factors come into play. But state is an institution. It has always been an institution. So I think they could I my opinion would be they would attest to the idea of they could attest to the idea of a state as long as it does not interfere in their legal perception of how and what a state should be. But they have always been of the opinion that ideally it should be a state ruled under the Sharia law. But
so
to
for
say
them
that
there is no nation.
nahi, then let's stretch this idea. Then comes the idea of a nation. Now this is the point of contestation. I think for me they have practical problems in attesting to the idea of a nation, because a nation requires a nation in the sense of an entity, a living and thriving entity, requires interaction, acceptance of various modes of living. So this is where the question should be designed in such a way that the ball is put in their part of the court. Are you, let's say, liberal enough to put that book aside, which I think they won't? And if they do not do that, I think they are in clear violation of the idea of a nation. Because for me, state is very simple. I can be anything, but I can accept the idea of a state. Because see, it's not exclusive to anything. Everybody who's a citizen is a state. It's as simple and plain as that. But for becoming a part of the nation, you have to accept everything. I have to accept a theist, agnostic, and by accepting means I need to internalize that he is as equal as me, and that is not the case. And besides, the point is, a state gives you citizenship, so it's fair and square for everybody. But to be a member of a nation, you need to live out of your skin,
So,
to to accept something that might not be the idea of how you perceive something. So I think he's right. Savarkar is right, but but
so on the
the whole
contrary,
conception,
Govalkar was wrong.
I think on the contrary, if I understand it properly, I might be wrong. I might be wrong, because I think it's the other way around. I think it's the other way around, especially the distinction between state and nation and the Muslim idea of it, and Muslims being outsiders. Because I do not attest to the idea of this population being outsider, because the base population is purely Indian, and I surely attest to the fact that the genetic makeup is similar. Only the path that leads them to their Allah and to my Prabhu, as a Smart or as a Shaiv or as a Vaishnav or as a worshipper of Shakti, might be different. Or in fact, or as a member of, let's say, Ajivikas, or as a member of Charvak school of thought.
Definitely, they are not, you know, followers of hedonistic
No, no, no,
ideology.
no, 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 surely not. You cannot say that.
Then what about the pan-Islamic state? There they
I
don't
think
talk about nation. They talk about establishing a
because
state.
that is why I said, na, for a Muslim, even for a Muslim, the idea of state is more inclusive, because they will have one common factor spread across everything. And what would that be? A religion, pan Islamic. So the idea of religion as a unifying force works for them. But at the point when you try to get let's say, get an interview with the idea of nation, uh, the interviewer will run away, because they both cannot be present in the same frame. For them, a state will work, because a state is a plain entity running on certain laws which might be manipulated, which might be designed in a certain way. But a nation cannot be designed in such a way.
So,
Especially when you look at the idea of nation from our worldview.
so as per you, what is the way out? What
Because
could be the best way out for
because the best way out is
people of India?
certainly uh, the scientific and the religious explanation is that there are many ways to achieve oneness, and if somebody says that my way is the superior way, I'm surely going to reject him.
Then what could be the best way to tackle this problem?
To tackle
Or
this,
do you think that this problem could be tackled?
about kindly attribute something to the problem. What's the problem? I need attribution.
I mean, how can we stop this notion of, you know, trying to force somebody to chant "Hail to the motherland"?
We should
So,
not. We should not.
but this does, create a picture that they are not in favor
No,
of
I
the
think a lot of training,
nation.
a lot of training is required. A lot of civil behavior has to be brought forth and learned, and
So,
they have to be
so
they have to be accepting of the idea that standing for the national anthem does not violate the principles of Quran. Uh, it's merely a moment of acceptance that those two things are different.
so do you think that these are very complex topics, issues?
Certainly complex for somebody who has been limited by a framework, but certainly uh,
So is it not true that
progressive to somebody.
most people of India do not
But
understand what
my
this?
personal opinion is I would not tell them to stand. Okay, because
So you put the constitution first.
हाँ, I put the constitution first, because if I do not put the constitution first,
So what does the V stand for?
then I'm left with my own religious identity and other many identities, So if I do not put constitution first, then I'm completely at odds with the other religions.
So, what is your idea of we mentioned in the constitution, in the preamble? How do you see that we? Who does this we stand for?
We stands for everybody who's a citizen of this country, irrespective of his personal beliefs and ritualistic patterns of living. I believe that there is space for everyone in that book, and that book is as sacred as any book that we worship. Though I wouldn't worship that book, but certainly that book tells me how to behave in the contemporary times, and the book is a part of a literary process, a process that India culminated through, a process that was the result of, let's say, 5 to 800 years of living and suffering, or let's say understanding how to make our lives better. So we can surely say that that book is as sacred and as holy as anything else. And besides, the idea of dharma is something that has to be adorned. जो धारण करने योग्य है उसको धर्म कहते हैं. तो आज का धर्म यही है कि आज का जो पॉजिटिव मोरल ऑर्डर है, which has been enshrined in the constitution, that has to be abided by. And therefore for me, the idea of we stands to be inclusive, to be more accepting, and to be firm in certain matters of public discretion, and to be discreet in certain matters of individual identity. That's it.
So, let's talk about literature a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
My question is related to John Keats.
Mm-hmm.
There is a very famous line of his, and it is, a joy, a thing of joy
A
is
thing of beauty is a joy forever.
whatever it is. That
Its
what I had
loveliness
read.
increases, but it never turns into nothing.
So, what do you make of that line? I mean, what kind of beauty is he trying to point out?
The beauty that lies within you. It's a representative of the Hindu view of cyclical existence. It's about love that is timeless. It's about everything that has a transformative scope for meaning extraction. I mean, for me, if the beauty is fossilized in terms of your physical appearance, then I think I will be disappointed after, let's say,
So
a decade or
So, if
20
I say
20
that
years.
that line
But
was
if my idea of beauty is about something that encapsulates you in terms of your essence, then I'm surely going to
a
be
thing
in
of beauty,
awe.
joy forever,
Uh,
what kind of joy is he talking about?
no, he's not. He's
Does he
not
want us
talking
to
about.
be a hedonistic
No,
man?
no, no. Why do you always connect everything with hedonism?
So, does he talk about trance?
Why trans? Why?
Is
I
that
mean,
not a
I
state
mean,
of joyness?
I mean, why would somebody use the word trans for uh, a state as beautiful as joy? Why cannot you be fully conscious and enjoy that? Why do you need to go into, let's say, a state where you are neither conscious or neither aware fully? For me, the idea is that joy is the subset of beauty. I cannot encapsulate your, let's say, your speciality in terms of one aspect, that too of a fossilized nature. It changes. If I understand your essence, I would surely be more appreciative of you, because I understand the element that drives you, the element that makes you what you are. Now, if it's external, if it's something uh, temporal in nature, then I will have to make amends with the fact that it's not going to stay beyond a certain period of time. But let's say if I'm in love with the person, so the joy of living in love with a person will increase, because every time when the person will act in let's say in a certain way, I'll be more appreciative of his or her idiosyncrasies, the small things that he or she does, the idea of her way of life or his way of life. So, so it's a cycle, a thing of beauty. You cannot see. He is trying to objectify, or he is trying to objectively distance himself from this cycle is something that we can debate upon. But but when he says that a thing of beauty is a joy forever, he is essentially highlighting the fact that anything that has beauty has an element of joy in it, because it has it. He does not use the word love. He says, for its loveliness increases, and it never turns into never turns into nothingness. So why the use of word loveliness? I mean, he's not using the word love, but the idea of loveliness, that is an attestation to the fact that something can be very endearing, heartwarming, magnetic, attractive, and at the same time it can be evolutionary.
So don't you think
It
that
can
it is
manifest.
also a form of intoxication?
I mean, why are you using such words which are very limited in a different context, and that can
No, I'm
surely
trying to
see.
discuss those things in physical terms.
I'll tell you. Okay,
Because
if in terms of
if you
physicality,
include
if in terms of physical,
intangibility
I
into
mean,
this,
this whole idea, the whole idea of this poem is intangible,
so do you think that
and
this,
anything that has to do with time beyond a certain space and geography has to attest to this idea of intangibility.
so do you think
Haven't you
that,
seen Christopher Nolan's Interstellar? I mean, time cuts
well, I haven't
time,
been,
love cuts across gravity
well,
and space as well.
I was in class ninth then, but I had written an answer.
In fact, if you see Inception, you'll get the same idea. He's not looking at the totem, but he's looking at his children, because he knows that he has been through a grind. And what's more important is the idea of joy that those children bring. So he's ready to uh, ignore the totem, and the director is ready to leave us to our better senses of judgment, so as to decide our own idea of the ending.
So do you see any kind of absurdity in this kind
Oh,
of a statement?
I
A
do see.
joy forever. I mean, if I am dead, then what kind of joy will
Yes.
I be
Now we come to a
enjoying?
true question. No, every question is true. Let me not be too intelligent. See, this idea of absurdity is time and space bound. Our forevers are limited by our idea of life and death. Since we were neither consulted uh, nor we accept the nor we accept and know the time of our death, except in certain cases when we are suffering from certain ailment, that too the exact moment is unknown, and nobody remains to tell you how it actually feels. So this idea of forever is an idea of an existence that has no ends on both the sides. It's more of a tunnel that has light on both the ends, with the difference being we we attest to the idea of light at the end of the other side, because we have a certain degree of consciousness, and we can make some meaning, we can make some create some sense out of it. But the other end, the adolescent end, or the newborn baby wala end, that end is confusing, because nobody has the memory of it.
So, what about that line of Oso when he says that beauty
There is
doesn't last, it fade away, it
fades
fades
away.
away? Why does he say that? I mean, why is he saying that?
Well, I'll have to read his
Is
whole.
he
I'll have
pointing
to read
out the
his whole
physical
statement.
beauty, or is it forcing us to look beyond that?
I mean, it can be true for both the things. Certainly, and most obviously for the physical aspect of it, but even the inner beauty uh, does not last forever.
So, what are the attributes of inner beauty?
That's a good question. Inner beauty, sublimity, is the first attribute. Peace, a sense of accommodative behavior, uh, the idea of seeking, and anything that falls in that category or in that line. Because everything that I just told you is about looking forward.
So, do you think, or do you see John Keats as a philosopher as well?
Array, every poet is a philosopher. The
So, what
unacknowledged
about
legislator
you?
of the
Are
world.
you also a philosopher? Unrecognized one?
Nahi. I would not. I would dare to put myself in the category of such august people.
Why are you being
In
so
all,
humble? Why are you showing humility here? Why
that
can't you
I am.
be open and say that yes, I am a philosopher, though I am unrecognized, that doesn't matter? I mean, what is the problem in that? Even
See,
I could be a philosopher if I
every
have my
see
own
everybody
philosophy.
living out an existence is a philosopher, but it's better that you do not
I think you
see.
are writing a book on philosophy as well, in the form of poetry.
See, my professor wrote a book,
Oh,
a
let's not
collection
talk
of.
about that.
I will surely talk about that. The title thrills me. Every life is about living out an existence, suffering. If we go through Mr. Albert Camus, that idea of waiting for Godot. So, for me, the idea of shedding the metaphors is more important, because what are metaphors? Metaphors are our identity, the elements of our identity. So, if I say that I am a philosopher, why am I limiting myself? Why am I limiting myself to something as fundamental as a man or a woman, or let's say any gender, who tries to inquire into the epistemological or ontological aspects of existence through his rigorous approach or his disciplinary approach? When my when my religious identity tells me that I am one with the existence, so why should not I hold the biggest aspect of interpretation that has been provided to me? After all, it's all about how we gather memory and how we attest to them,
So,
isn't it?
so if I say that because you have worked a lot of, you have worked most of the time on dystopia.
Hmm.
So,
That's very
dystopia is something
facetious.
which is related to humans, if
Uh,
I am correct.
the other side of our existence is dystopia, in fact, illusion. Maya is a dystopia.
So, don't you think that makes you a philosopher a bit?
Indeed. I see. I said I would not like to put myself into the category of such august and such bright people, because I think I do not qualify with the current amount of work that I have done. But I surely didn't deny or didn't accept the
I
proposition.
do believe that dystopia has something to do with human behavior as well.
Yes, subjective or objective, both of it.
So,
Both.
you are dealing with human behavior in some way.
Yes.
So, if I make the statement that your thesis is related to human psychology to some extent, I would not be wrong.
No, surely you won't be wrong. In fact, you're correct in pointing that out.
Then, what about the Marxist theory?
I mean, where does this question arise?
Because dystopia is also
How does this
related to
question arise?
dystopia is also related to human society, the kind
So,
of society we have been in.
do you think that the Marxist perspective is the only perspective to uh, talk about
Because
the
when
human
you say
society?
that dystopia is opposite of utopia,
Hmm.
then tell me, don't you think that Marxism is something which is trying to bring utopia? Because they consider capitalism as a practice or as an ideology which exploits human labor.
No, you cannot discount the audacity and the capacity of uh, an individual. I attest to the idea of a society which is more organized in terms of its responsibilities, but I'm surely in the favor of an individual taking charge of his conditions, because let's put this idea philosophically and do a comparative kind of analysis. We'll find that uh, everything that has to do with any kind of inquiry of self and the other has to be individual. So, how do you think that a society designed, calibrated specifically in terms of its uh, idea of production, cultural or otherwise, will be able to serve the individual? Because the existential unit or the existential consciousness is basically individual. Everybody has a head, and that head uh, has a cranium, and that cranium has a mind. So everybody is individualistic, and certainly we are not in the practice of producing carbon copies of each other, or let's say a carbon copy which is exactly the ideal representation of a perfect man. So for me, that idea, both the ends, see, both the ends for me are equally foggy. Reality lies somewhere in between.
So, which one is correct? Dystopia or utopia?
I think dystopia is the
What is the reality? Are we in dystopia right now, or
for that we'll have to go into philosophy. We'll have to question the idea of reality, and dystopia or the idea of utopia
are we real?
are is in fact the literature of it is uh, is limited in the sense that not much of philosophical rigor has been brought into that discussion, because it has to be inquired through the lens of philosophy. For me, both the ends are foggy, and that question has to be dealt with a philosophical rigor at first, and then the elements of the modern day state, the idea of surveillance, the idea of body politics, the idea of gender performativity, and other modern issues or postmodern issues come into play.
So, if I make a
Because it's
statement here,
because dystopia or utopia, it's all in our head.
so if I make this
because
statement,
because if somebody if somebody is at peace with a dystopian existence, he's very right in choosing his way of life, and somebody living in the same room might not be attesting to that idea. So realities, perceptions can differ. So it's all in the head. So why would I take the external route and inquire outside when I know it's somewhere within me?
so do you believe state is necessary for the
Yes.
human society?
Yes, it is. To
Then you are
bring,
a capitalist.
I did I not tell you that I am surely attesting to the idea of individual, and with capital comes the idea of an individual. When did I deny that?
Hmm.
I'm only talking about the dogmatic approach of any individual, or let's say somebody attesting to either Marxism or capitalism as a foolproof way beyond any reproach.
Hmm. It is a difficult subject to talk about.
Surely.